commentary on this outline, which we'll have posted on the website and YouTube as well. This is going to just be an overview of the actual liturgical funeral practices of the church that we should be working towards fulfilling, and also a little bit about some knowledge about the funeral home practices that maybe don't go along with our own practices. And that portion of it will be based on a book called A Christian Ending by Deacon Alex Barna, and his book that I did not bring with me. It's at the rectory, but you guys can read this book, Christian Ending. It's a very quick read. It's a very enlightening read, but a lot of it's based by a deacon of the Orthodox Church, Barna, that he promotes Orthodox Christian burial societies and natural burials. So a lot of his commentary will be displayed throughout this presentation. So just beginning here on this outline, first and foremost, let's talk about who gets a funeral in the Orthodox Church. It needs to be known that only Orthodox faithful, people who were baptized into the Orthodox Church, and more precisely people who lived out their faith, who believed the tenets of the faith, get a funeral in the church. So people who have separated themselves from the church, people who have gone to another church, no longer consider themselves Orthodox. Technically, those who don't even come to church anymore, don't fulfill their duties as going to confession and communion, are supposed to have an Orthodox burial. Oftentimes we do it out of mercy, so that they can be laid to rest if they're baptized, but technically they shouldn't. Also, the catechumens, this is also not, there's something I learned not too long ago, but catechumens, if you're made a catechumen, mean if you are someone studying to become a member of the Orthodox Church, was enrolled as a catechumen with the prayers, but have not been baptized or chrismated into the church, you too are allowed to have a funeral in the church. You too are allowed to have a funeral in the church. So those are the requirements for a funeral in the church. So, leading up to a funeral, there are services that are prescribed to be done for people who are gravely ill, people who are near death, okay? In the outline, it's under the section number 2 that there's an office for the parting of the soul from the body. So if someone who's gravely ill, someone who's in fear of their life, they should call the priest so that the priest can come and say these prayers. It's a service that is primarily a canon to the Mother of God, to the Theotokos, and offers some kind of consolation for the person so that they're relaxed, so that they help their soul be ready for their final destination. Okay? So it's a very moving service. It's a beautiful service, and it should be something that we take advantage of if we know that someone's ill and that their time is short. At the time that someone dies, there's also a small service called the Office of the Parting of the Soul from the body. So someone has just died, the priest should come and say this service, and it's a service that gives hope of the resurrection. So it's good for the relatives to be there for this service as well, and it's asked for the remission of sins of this person, of the person who just departed. At that time, too, it's also typical that we'll do what we call a liturgy, which is a short memorial service. Okay, so oftentimes in the Greek tradition they'll call that a trisagian service, but in the Russian tradition we'll call it a liturgy. And this is done in the home. This should be done before the body's leaves where it is died. So if it's at their home, if it's at a hospital or at a nursing facility, the service should be done there. Barna, the book that I mentioned, he promotes all natural preparation for burial. Okay. I'm not promoting this here, but it's not a bad thing. And in fact, it's the most natural, the best way that we can, as a community, unsanitize death. So we in the book, he reminds us that before this past, I guess, last 100 years, really, all burials are done by families, by friends and families. When someone died, they were cleaned, they were taken care of, they were dressed for a funeral. Not by a funeral home director, not something that the body wasn't taken away and we just never saw it again until the funeral came or until the wake. It was a way of us, it was good for for grieving and for being okay with death. We kind of shy away from death. Like, we don't want to talk about it. It's something taboo, but it's totally natural, right, for us to, everyone's going to die. You know, we weren't born to die originally, and theologically speaking, but we are going to die. And every one of us are going to need to come to terms with that, and we shouldn't be so scared of death. It shouldn't be such a taboo thing. So, getting back to this, he would say that, you know, typically, you know, the body would be laid out in a parlor, a home. This is why homes had parlors, these different things, that the body would be laid there and ready for its rest and be prepared before the funeral. So this is when this Latia service would, even before the body was moved there, would be done. Typically, we're going to call a funeral home director now, and they're going to take the body away. And so here we would want to do this Latia memorial service for the departed at that point, okay, before that happens, okay? So let's talk about what happens between that point until the next time we're going to see our loved ones. So if we call a funeral director to take care of our loved ones' preparation, they're going to most likely want to do, we're going to get into this, going to embalm the body, prepare the body for burial, dress it, and have what the next service that we would do, it would be a all-night vigil for the departed, okay? Today, it has come it's very popular and common even at this church. This would take place at the funeral home. They call it a wake, right? We're awake, right? Why was it awake? Because we stood vigil. That's why they called it awake, because we're awake. And we're actually waiting, seeing if the person is truly dead at the home. We would wait, are they going to wake? Right? We're just seeing, are they truly dead? People have been buried alive, brothers and sisters, that this happened, so this is why it was called awake. But we're standing vigil around the repose, okay? This should be done in the church, not at a funeral home, okay? We would do it, what we call upon the key, as part of this all-night vigil. So what is the all-night vigil? Let's see. So it's oftentimes when I first got here, they would call it a patastas, right? You guys would always order a patastas. And technically, what you're asking for me as the priest to do is to do upon the kida, which was, it's a service for, it's a memorial service for the dead, right? We do these on Soul Saturdays and so forth, and for people's anniversaries, and we'll go over that a little bit. But technically a patastas is the all-night vigil. It's more than upon the kida. So we'd get together, we'd serve vespers, and then we would serve this upon the kida, and then the matin service, all put together. That was an all-night vigil funeral for the dead. And that probably should still be done. It's appropriate to do that, but oftentimes at the funeral home, we just do upon the kida. We just do upon the kida. It should be done in the church. The body should be laid out in the church. At that point, that's when the funeral home director, if you're using a funeral home, they should bring them that evening in the church, and they should have the body here, and that's where the panikita. It should not be done at a funeral home. Oftentimes, that's just what happens. That's what the family knows and understands. That's what's become so common because it's convenient. And be honest with you, because the funeral home can charge a fee for it. They've got to use their funeral home, and they're going to charge another fee for it. But it should be done here in the church with the loved ones and the family praying the memorial service. So what happens after that panikida is done? By tradition, there should be an all-night vigil by the loved ones. They would read the Psalter, the Book of Psalms, over the body of the deposed. Of the repose, sorry, and they would read the Psalms all day until the next day when the funeral would occur, all night long. So people would take turns, Now, if it was a priest, by the way, or a bishop, they would be reading the gospel nonstop. But any layman, it would just be the book of Psalms, the Psalter, all night long. It's a pious custom, and most people, we just don't do it anymore. But it's part of our traditions. It's part of the soul is. The soul has been torn from the body, and it's in flux. And these prayers help it. And it helps the living to be able to grieve and to come one with the departure as well. So reading the Psalms, which are very soothing, they can be also very hopeful and joyful, are very helpful. It's part of our customs and our traditions. So what do we do the next day? We have the liturgy. This is the office of the burial of the dead. So I'm going to go through this timeline here. So in the evening, if we were to do this service at the funeral home, sometimes we just have no choice, right? This is what the family wishes. When the hearse pulls up, we would be singing, the priest would meet the hearse, singing Holy God. Holy God, Holy Mighty, Holy Immortal, have mercy on us, right? It would, as we, in a grave tone, sensing the body as it comes in. The body is brought in, and the feet should face the altar so that the head, so if someone would sit up, they're going to be facing east. They're going to be facing the altar. They're going to be facing the resurrection of Christ. Okay? That's how it's set in we set that up. The caskets would be open. We have open caskets at funerals unless there's some particular reason there shouldn't be. If the person died at some kind of tragic death, it might not be appropriate to have it open. But in our custom, our traditions, it's an open casket funeral. Okay, we're not afraid of death. We're not afraid. If you have a little one who grew up in the church and did funerals, you'll be surprised how normal a dead body is to them, and it should be to us too. Like. It shouldn't be weird to be around a dead body. It's just every one of us dies. Everybody dies. It shouldn't be a weird thing. But we make it weird in our society, our modern society. We make it a weird thing. It's not a weird thing. They're just like us, me and you. Just their soul's not there right now. It's going to their judgment. Okay. So how should the departed be dressed? Oftentimes we have the funeral homes dress them up in a nice gown or nice, maybe a suit or something. However, you want to remember the person. As Barner reminds us in this book, and as it is our custom in our churches, it's not the most appropriate thing for them to wear. What's most appropriate is a white gown, a white baptism gown, like you would when you're baptized, if you're an adult or as a child. A white gown. It should always be white. We're preparing for the resurrection of the dead, okay? And it's bright and radiant, and so we should be wearing white if at all possible, and it should be a loose baptismal gown if possible, okay? That is the tradition. In fact, people are often buried, if they keep their baptismal garment, they're buried with it as well, maybe under the pillow if it doesn't fit them. But you put it underneath your pillow, you're buried with your baptismal garment that you're given when you're baptized into the church, if you have it still. Okay. Also, the casket. The casket just needs to be simple. It just needs to be a wooden box. The more simpler, the better. Okay. It doesn't need to be ornate. You're going to see a theme that goes through this, that our burials should be how we should live our lives. Our funeral service should be how we lived our lives, which is humble and not extravagant. Okay. Christians are not extravagant. They're not loud people with showing money. It's not what this is about. It should be very humble, okay? And so the basics of wooden casket would be best. It doesn't have to be. And I know that what you're going to do is, if you use a funeral home, they're going to sell you. This is their job. They sell stuff to make money. They're going to want to upgrade you all the time with the caskets, okay, and your family. And it's bad because they also often take advantage of a time when people are maybe in a sorrowful, they're mourning, and they can't make these decisions, and they want to. Don't you want to do this for your loved one? Don't you want to give them the best? I assure you, they don't care at that point. They really don't. They don't care. And so you want to do something very humble, very basic. Just like our Lord lived his life and how he was buried very humbly, that's how we're going to be buried, okay? All right. So with that, the person laid out in the casket in the center of the church, often icon of Christ or their patron saint is laid next to them. There's a wreath. If you've ever been to a funeral, you'll see that it says the Holy Godly Wedding. Right? The Shrisaya. It's a wreath that gets put upon their head, on their forehead. That's going to be placed in. A hand cross is oftentimes placed, the priest will put the hand cross in the coffin right next to him during the service, okay, for the departed. Okay? Liturgy, it's custom the liturgy is served before the funeral. That we would have a divine liturgy be served before the funeral. And this is something that we don't see in parish practice very often anymore. We don't do liturgies. Sometimes in some traditions they'll wait till the 40th day to do the liturgy for the departed. I think for various reasons why this has come out of this use is because oftentimes we have a lot of people, friends, family that aren't Orthodox, that here, at least here in America, that come to this service and they kind of feel excluded from participation in the liturgy because they're not Orthodox. Sometimes it's just you're in a sorrowful, some family might be in a sorrowful state, and they don't, so celebrating the joy of the Eucharist seems kind of odd at that time, but it's always been our tradition to celebrate liturgy before the funeral begins. And I think every clergyman I have ever heard of that's always done, but it should be done for the laity as well. But again, it's often not. In practice, it's just not done anymore. It's not that it's wrong to serve liturgy, it's just fallen out of this service. Most people want to get it done with, in my opinion. That's what happens when funerals come around, right? So if there's liturgy, we celebrate liturgy at that point. We'd celebrate the liturgy for the departed, okay? And then we would go into the funeral. And the funeral is essentially a Matin service, Ortho service. It has the canon for the resurrection of the dead. And then there's other hymns that it resembles the service of Holy Saturday, that we celebrate on Great Friday evening when we do the burial for the Lord, right? We bring out the tomb of Christ and we process with him. It's the format of the service is very similar because that's what it is. It's a funeral service for the Lord, and our funerals are the same way. So the services are there. So and it's a little different. The service is different. Okay, the hymnography is different, depending if it's a layman, if it's an ordained clergyman, if it's a child. Our hymns are different if it's a child, because we're not asking for as many repentance. A child is not culpable for its sin. So a child, the services are different. And if it's done during Bright Week, funerals are much different as well. They're all about Pascha. It's a Paschal service during Bright Week, a Paschal funeral service. So if you want to die after Pascha, and you can bury during Bright Week. It'll be the most joyous funeral that we all can participate in. Okay. So during the service, candles will be distributed. Everyone should be holding a candle during the funeral service. Okay. And then as we go through the service, how many have been to a funeral in the Orthodox Church? Yeah. So you have a little bit of, some of you have a little bit of idea what it looks like. There's small traditions that are different from, I guess, depending on what kind of church you're in, but they're generally the same with a small degree of local customs that are different. But at the end at the dismissal and the singing of Memory Eternal, there's always going to be a last kiss, okay? And again, we're not afraid of death. We're not afraid of the body that's laying before us. And so the loved ones should always come forward. They're going to kiss the loved one goodbye. They're going to kiss their loved ones goodbye, okay? And I've not seen this in any other church, Christian church, at funeral services, but this is what we do. We say goodbye, we kiss goodbye to our loved ones, and then we would dismiss to the funeral, or to the cemetery, okay? Once at the cemetery, we're again going to do another litia, another short memorial service like we did at the service of the departed. Okay, the burial plot, they go down again just like they were in the church. If they were to stand up, they're going to be facing the resurrection of Christ. They're going to be facing east. That's how we put them into the ground. Okay, that's how they lay in there. When the priest does the last litia, they're also not only bless the casket, but they're going to make a sign of the cross and put in dirt, to seal the tomb for the second coming of Christ. It's very common that the people put dirt on it. Many places I've seen, the families, whether or not they hire somebody at the cemetery plot or not, they want to bury their loved ones. And I've seen people stick around with shovels, putting the dirt after they've been laid in there. They're laying their loved one to rest. So it's not uncommon that we will physically start putting the dirt on top of the tomb once it's in there. Okay, it helps with the grief, helps with that whole mourning process. Okay, there is of course, headstones are usually a cross. That's a typical thing. When we get into different cemeteries, municipal cemeteries, there's always regulations that we have to follow. I would recommend always being able to go to a cemetery that's either an Orthodox cemetery or a monastery to be buried. If you're in a municipal, most of our people here in this parish are at a municipal, a city-owned cemetery, and so you have to play nice with their rules and regulations. And we'll talk about that more on the second part of this presentation. Okay. And there's also a mercy meal after the end, usually in the church hall or wherever there's a mercy meal to celebrate the loved one at that point, and just have some talk. So that's the funeral service. I didn't go into detail of how to do it, but that's what we do. That's the order. So we've got, when someone is about to die, we have a service. When someone dies, immediately we have a service. Okay? When someone, the night before the funeral, we have a service. It should be in the church. And then we have services for the funeral here in the church, and then we do another service once we get to the gravesite. So we're praying all that time for the loved one. Okay, we should, timing-wise, and we'll just say timing-wise for the funeral. It'd be ideal if we can bury everyone within 3 days. Okay, it would be ideal. Sometimes it's just not possible because of family members out of town, because the priest schedule. Sometimes they're not. People die, and then it's not the most convenient for us living, right? But so we have to do the best we can. But it's best not to push it out very far, but always be in touch with the priest. And we tend to put the funeral director in charge, and the priest is the last one to know sometimes about what's going on in the changes. And without the church, the doors open, there can't be a funeral, right? So keep the priest in the loop about what has transpired, so that one, we can pray for them appropriately, and also we can make sure that we can begin to have a timely service. Okay. So why do we say within 3 days? Well, let's talk about burial within 3 days, because memorial service. This is going to be a bullet point 8 on this outline. So there's ongoing memorial service. So the memorial for the dead, again, this is a panikila. This, like we did the night before the funeral, right? It's a panikila. Some in the Greek tradition, they don't do these panikila, they do the tresiega, the litia. It's just the shorter version of it. But these services are done on the 3rd, 9th, 40th day. And then anniversaries, and then, in our Orthodox Church, we have memorial services set aside throughout the year to do these services for everyone, for all the repose, okay? Why are these days selected for the repose? So the reason they are selected, it actually comes from an account of St. Macarius the Great. From an angel, an angel visited him and told him that these days that we should pray for our loved ones, and so this is how it goes here. So the 3rd day, this is the reason. He says, this is the day when one's guardian angel, provides relief for the soul, which is grieving the loss of its body. Tradition states that the soul is permitted to wander the earth for these 2 days immediately following death. It is on this third day that Christ rose from the dead, and so this is the day that the soul goes to heaven to reverence God. Okay? So we would ideally want to do this on the third day for this reason. And if we can bury him on the third day, it would be even greater. Okay? It would be even best. But again, timing is often not the most convenient for funerals. Okay, for the next 6 days, that's between the third and the ninth day, the angels now show the departed soul all the abodes of the saints and the beauty of paradise. If the person lived a faithful Christian life, then the soul rejoices in seeing these things. If, however, the person lived a life of sin, the soul will wail and reproach itself. Then on the ninth day, the soul again goes to heaven to reverence God. Thus, on the ninth day, after the soul has viewed paradise, we celebrate a memorial on the ninth day. So again, the third day and on the ninth day, the soul is like in this transition period between heaven and earth all this time. Okay? And so, and the third day and the ninth day, it's going before the throne of God to see God. And so this is why our prayers are especially effectual on these days, because because of the progress of what the soul is experiencing in the afterlife. Okay. For the next 30 days, the soul now tours Hades and witnesses the torments of the ungodly. The soul will tremble lest it be condemned to imprisonment therein. So for 30 days now, it's in Hades, which is not heaven. And it's not hell, but it's a place where it's where we're going to be dwelling. All of us will be dwelling to the second coming, but we get an experience of heaven or hell depending on how we live our lives. So in these 30 days, he's seeing the worst of Hades. He's seeing the worst of those people who live their life apart from God. That's what the soul is seeing, okay? So then on the 40th day, the soul is again taken to heaven to reverence God. So again, this is why we're praying on the 40th day. It's going back to heaven. The soul is going to heaven. It is on the 40th day that the soul is judged by Christ and either condemned below or joins the glory of the saints. This is why we celebrate memorial on the 40th day. So the 40th day is very, very the most important, which is why I say some traditions, they move this funeral, the liturgy, so often to the 40th day. To the 40th day, because this is when we're judged. On the 40th day after we died, 40 days after we died, the soul has been in flux for 40 days. So this is why we have set aside these times. Each time the soul goes up to before God to be judged, we pray for them. So on the 40th day is when we get what we would call our individual judgment. And so we will be assigned our place in Hades, in neither hell or heaven, but we'll either be dwelling with the righteous, all the saints who are close to God and getting a foretaste of the pleasure of heaven, or we're going to be getting an experience of hell with all the sinful people. And it's just an experience of Hades. Again, not too long ago we had the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and so that's really a good example in the Gospels of what this is like. So they both departed. The angels took Lazarus up to be with Father Abraham, right? And he was in the mansions of the righteous. And then Lazarus up in the righteous, and the rich man there was a gulf between them, a chasm, right? And he was tormented it was so hot he wanted Lazarus to dip his finger in water to cool him down, right? They were in the same place. They could see each other. And they could converse. They're in the same place. It's Hades, but total different experience of it. And so that's after the personal judgment. That's what we are. There's always hope, and we continue to pray. We don't know where we fall, where people are going to land in this judgment, right? We just don't know. That's up to God. In fact, I think we judge ourselves, and God just is a witness to it. That's why we go before Him 3 times. So we have hope, though, still. That's why even after this 40th day, on anniversaries, birthdays, anniversaries of deaths, we continue to pray. Soul Saturdays, we continue to pray, because the final judgment has not happened, brothers and sisters. so to speak, to use the language that we're talking about funerals. The final nail in the coffin has not been sealed until the final judgment, so that when Christ comes back again, we all are judged again. Everyone's judged again, because we're hope. There's hope that we can all, again, attain heaven by the prayers of the church. Not by, after we die, we're done. No more good we can do. But people can do good in our name. And people can pray for us. And we're going to talk about that a little bit too. All right. So, memorial service. So, with regard to the memorial services, I put a little bit of information here about Koliva. Another one of our customs would be from these memorial, when we celebrate with these pandakilas, we would bring boiled wheat, often has as fruit. It's mixed with honey, and it's a sweet dish. We do this at the beginning of Lent as well, on St. Theodore Sunday or Saturday, and they offer this Koliva as an offering because of this gospel where, unless a grain of wheat die, fall into the earth, and resurrect again, it serves no purpose. So we use wheat as this symbolic remembrance that we all have to die. We're all going to go down back to earth and be resurrected again. So they offer wheat in this as a symbolism of this. Okay, and so it's a long custom. So if you order a service, you typically would want to know how to boil koliva, and make koliva, so that you can offer that as well. The priest knows how to do it, so if you need help or need someone to do it. So that's the funeral service. I'm going to go into some of these the second part, which has to do with the funeral industry and some of the do's and don'ts that we do in our church with regard to that, okay? So, right off the bat, cremation. Regarding cremation, okay? We don't do it. We don't cremate our bodies. We don't cremate our loved ones. It's not, in fact, if you do so, we can't have a funeral. We can't have a funeral for you. It's a non-negotiable, okay? You cannot get burnt to a crisp. And what's worse is, people do it, they say it's money saving and such. And I get that. I get that, it's because the funeral industry charges so much for funerals. But again, if we go back to this book that Deacon Barna, Christian Indian, he says, well, if we have the funeral societies to help prepare people, if we do, use wooden boxes, and we have more of a natural burial, it doesn't cost a lot. It doesn't cost a lot. It's not, we don't have to have a big ornate funeral in order to bury someone. It doesn't have to. And we're going to get into this too, but the funeral service, the funeral industry makes money on every little thing that you choose to do, or they say that you have to do, and you don't have to do it. And so people today turn to cremation, right? They turn to cremation because of the cost to buy a burial plot, the cost of the funeral. Well, it's still expensive to cremate our loved ones, and it goes against all our traditions. It goes against the holiness of the body, right? We don't do this because we reverence the body. We die like Christ died. We're buried. We have reverence for the body, just like the Berbers had reverence for Christ, because that was a Jewish custom. Okay, we have relics of saints, right? We serve on the altar. Every altar has, in the antimons or in the altar, we have relics of saints. But if we were to bury to cremate everybody, we'd have no relics of saints. We wouldn't have relics. We couldn't have these things. In fact, in cremation, you have to understand too, is that they don't just burn you. Okay, they burn you at a very intense heat for hours, but the bones don't burn. And so what they have to do is they pulverize you. Afterwards, they pulverize the bones to get you into an urn. How can they get you into an urn? They have to pulverize it. You understand how odd this sounds to a Christian, how we treat our bodies as the temples of God, and this is what we're going to do as soon as the soul departs. Remember, the soul is still, for 40 days, wandering around the different parts of the spiritual world and their body, and to see after their body is treated afterwards. Again, I don't think they care, they don't feel, but now, throughout Christian history, have martyrs died by burning? Yes. And God can resurrect anything. But that doesn't make it an excuse for us to go and do a disservice to somebody, to bury them out of usually convenience. And really what it is, the convenience, both for the funeral home and for the loved ones to just be done with it. So we don't do, and there's a lot of information here that, and some of the stuff that I plucked out from the book, A Christian Ending. I recommend you guys read this over. I don't want to go through it all, but just realize that cremations are not allowed, brothers and sisters, and a funeral was not going to be done, and we couldn't do typically, really upon the key that we would, I think out of mercy we would do it, but it really shouldn't be done either. Memorial service for those who are cremated, but we would do it out of mercy for the loved ones, but don't do this, okay? And then one of these other costs and thing that is so common today, and I don't want to read all this information, but it's very good information here, is on, it's in this handout, but it's on embalming and inhumation. So first off, embalming. Embalming there's nothing Christian about it. It's a pagan practice. And no one was embalmed really until, I think, until the Civil War. It became a practice to preserve bodies so that when they died in battle, they can go back and have a funeral, or else the bodies would be decaying too much. And so they capitalized that. So people who did this, they capitalized on it. They said they could make a living off of this. And so it wasn't until the Civil War that embalming happened. They don't do this in any other country except here. We do it in America. We embalm people. And I've had conversations with several funeral directors, and I asked them, because I know that embalming is not the best practice, okay? It's again, taking care of the body. You're plugged and sucked. You're sucked and plugged, and it's not becoming of what we want, how we would want to see our bodies handled, but this is what they do. And they also tell you, they'll say to you that they have to do it. If you want to have an open casket, you have to do it because it's sanitary. There's nothing unsanitary about a dead body that an alive body wouldn't have, okay? The only reason that you couldn't have an open casket, or you'd have to, is if it was a communicable disease that someone died from. And then, the government would say you absolutely couldn't. So if there was a disease, that there was a specific disease that it does cause, they died from, that they would cause a problem to people around them that were transferable, then that's an issue. But there is nothing unsanitary about a dead body. The decay starts, and it does, what bodies do. They start decaying, and then there is some smells, unpleasant smells. Historically, what we would do, we would always have, and Barna goes over in his book, but we would put ointments all over the oils and they call it natural essential oils on the body. This is how you would naturally preserve the body. You would rub the bodies, clean it, rub the bodies with this, and we put herbs in the casket. Traditionally, herbs were put in the casket, and this would help with that smell. But if we're burying in 3 days, you're not having as much issues, okay? And today, we even can put bodies in refrigerators at the funeral homes, which preserve the body just fine. It preserves the body just fine. To have to do an embalming, it's not necessary. If you ask a funeral director, can you show me the law that states you have to do it, they wouldn't be able to provide one. I looked it up in Ohio. There is none that states you have to embalm the body. And it does make the funeral home money. Sadly, if you're not willing to prepare the body yourself, you're going to have to embalm most likely, because the funeral home's not going to, they're going to tell you this is what you've got to do. And they're going to charge it to you. Okay, so if you're not ready, and I understand if you're not ready to prepare the body, it's foreign to our modern sensibilities. I say that modern because it's never been the ancient way. It's never been the historical practice. But if you're not willing to do it, you're going to have to. Does it stop us from doing a funeral or anything? No. It's just, again, it's not keeping with honoring the temple of God. Okay. So, but read through this about embalming, and then another point would be inhumation, so the burial. We talked about this a little bit about cemeteries and various cemeteries. So what happens oftentimes is that they want to put the casket, especially at these municipal, into a vault, into a concrete box. The casket will go into a concrete box and sealed, okay? That helps with settlement, right? So that there's no decaying, there's no holes in settlement. But what it also prevents is the body going back to the earth, and the body going back to where it needs to go to decompose as quickly as possible. And by the way, embalming does that too. It takes years and years for the body to be able to decay, to go back to God the way we were intended, dust to dust. So these vaults are a problem. If we wanted to, we should be naturally just put in the earth, but because of many cemeteries won't allow you to buy a plot unless you use a vault, it can be a problem. One solution to that would be to put a vault upside down. So that they put the casket and then they put the vault upside down, so at least the bottom side is still touching the earth. And they call this, believe it or not, a Muslim burial. Because Muslim guideline, their faith says you have to be buried into the ground. And so if you want to push the cemeteries, the municipal cemeteries, I'm sure that they'll Muslim burial say, I have to have a Muslim burial. They won't say if you're a Christian burial or an Orthodox Christian burial, but a Muslim burial, they're gonna, oh yeah, okay, we know what that is. So you could put the vault on top like this, so that just the bottom side. So it still prevents the settling, but it's not completely sealed. You can also look for cemeteries that do what they call natural burial or green burials. And they often, they're gonna just bury you in your wooden casket. Even a hard cardboard box would work too. They do these, honestly. And they bury you so that you're back to the earth. They call them green burials. And there are cemeteries. The closest one, I looked it up, is in Canton. So they do have one of these in Canton. It's not that far. A cemetery that does these. And it's actually preferred than being put in a vault. It's actually preferred than the people put in a vault. Yeah, I mean, it's the natural way that our bodies would go back to God, okay? Go back to our Creator. So these are these things in mind there. And it saves money. Vaults cost money too, right? So they tell you got to have it, and it costs money. You have to have it. You have to have it if you want to be buried here, and it costs money. So this is why funerals cost so much. It's a racket. They're going to tell you things that you have to have in order to bury your loved one. And this is why it costs so much. Okay? Organ donation. So there's really nothing against organ donation in the Orthodox Church. You can donate your organs, okay? There are some theologians that say that, except for heart, like they see the heart as something different, like that to let your heart be donated, because there's some theological meaning. The heart has got these, when we speak about the heart in our prayers, our heart is something different. It's very individualistic to us, our heart. So some theologians, it's not dogmatic, but say that hearts are something that you shouldn't donate. But there's no reason that you can't donate if you want to be a donator. Barna, he discussed this in that book, again, A Christian Ending. He's not a big proponent of any organ donation, not because he doesn't believe in saving lives, but he believes that so much money is made off of organ donation. So much money. It's a big, huge industry. Money is in the black market and also legally. Tons of money is made, and you don't see $1 of it. Your family doesn't see $1 of it, and so and oftentimes your bodies are kind of preserved so that they can get the organs, and maybe it can kind of compromise people, is what he says. But there is no reason you can't. If you're really compelled to be an organ donor, you can be an organ donor. There's not an issue with that. But it does maybe sometimes delay your burial, and because they have to now go do the funeral. Also, I didn't put in here, but I'm bringing my mind now thinking about organ donation, is that sometimes autopsies, you don't need an autopsy unless you need an autopsy, okay? Sometimes if someone dies in a medical facility, unless it's some kind of, by law they have to do it because they died maybe in a very suspicious way, nothing you can do about it. The law is going to say that an autopsy. But if they want to just do an autopsy, just say, oh, we don't know how he died, maybe we should do an autopsy to find out. Forget about it. You don't need it. They rip apart the body to do these things. They tear the body apart and inspect it. You don't need to do it just to satisfy curiosity. Don't worry about it. Sometimes you have to because of how the person dies. Maybe there's some suspicion involved and they want an autopsy. You can't, nothing you can do about that. Okay. In that case, you should use a funeral director if there's an autopsy because there's going to be some work to be done to put somebody back together. That is the truth. Okay. That is the truth. So just the last couple things here, and then open up for a couple questions, is knowing all of this, funeral practices, what we can and we can't do, and how it would be best to live out the liturgical life. It would be good to have a living will, to put a will together, and not only to direct how you want your life and all your possession, but more so how do you want to end your life. Also, you can designate, do you want to, these are decisions, do I want to be on life support the rest, forever and ever? These are things you can put in your life, your living will. How do I want, you can specify, I don't want to be cremated. I do not want to be cremated. Put that in there. I want an Orthodox church funeral. Okay? I want it done appropriately, and I want to be buried in this place or that place. Or pre-plan this stuff. There's insurance you can buy. It's very inexpensive to pre-plan. Buy the plots ahead of time. Again, I would recommend go to find a monastery to be buried at, or look in that Akron or that Canton Cemetery. If you've already got a plot here in Youngstown at one of them, it's fine. You want to be by your loved ones, it's fine. But you want to be at least give direction on where and how you want to be buried, and in what manner. Okay, it's in the will, and then there's some information, and you can register those wills so that it'll be in a national registry. Everyone. So if something happens, if you're out of town, they can look up your will wherever you're at. So it's a pretty cool tool. And same thing goes with healthcare, power of attorney. These are good things to have. There's some information on here to read. Okay. So.